All right, welcome back for part 2 of chapter 12 about the Reformation and what was going on in Europe. So let's take a peek at the slides that go along with this. Okay, again, make sure you're taking some notes because we will be turning those in when we're back at school. So Reformation Spreads, Chapter 12, these are your fifth set of notes. And the final set of notes, I believe, let me take a quick peek over here. Yep, final set of notes for this unit. So diving on in, we're going to look at a couple different countries, Switzerland, England, and France, and take a peek at what was going on in these countries specifically during the Reformation. So starting in Switzerland, it was one of the first places outside Germany that felt the effects of the Reformation, because it's literally right next door. So Ulrich Zwingli is one of the leaders there. He felt that the church was corrupt, just like Luther was feeling. And so Zwingli came to believe that salvation comes through faith, not just from works. And a couple others in Switzerland. There was a group known as the Anabaptists. They said that only true believers should be allowed to be members of a church congregation. That you really needed to make that confession and not just kind of be pretending. They felt that church and state, so the church and the government, should be kept very separate. They also practiced something called pacifism, basically meaning that if there was a war, they would not go fight, not bear weapons, and kill other people. So in the United States today, we can see some descendants from this group of Anabaptists, people that are Mennonites and Amish, can kind of trace their lineage back to these Anabaptists. All right, another gentleman to highlight here is John Calvin. He's probably one of the most influential leaders of this movement after Martin Luther. He was persecuted by the French government for his outspokenness and ended up fleeing to Switzerland. And while there, he wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion at the age of 26, and that helped kind of spread his ideas and thoughts on this whole movement. All right, jumping over the channel to England, we're going to talk a little bit about the Reformation there. So in England, there wasn't an outspoken, strong leader like we had in Germany or in Switzerland. We still have the Tudor family in power. I talked about them a little bit in a previous chapter with that whole War of Roses between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. And so we have this Tudor family. Right now, Henry VIII is on the throne, and he breaks away from the Catholic Church. Okay? Basically, he wants to have that son, and his wife isn't giving him that son, so he wants to divorce her. The church doesn't let him, so he decides to leave and basically start his own church. So that's a lot of history there in a brief moment, but needless to say, Protestantism is strengthened in England when he breaks away from the church. So what's the reaction on the Catholic side of things? Well, his daughter, Mary the First, okay, her mom was Catherine of Aragon, okay. When his daughter goes to take the throne, she basically restores Catholicism to England, and anybody that basically speaks out against her and her religion is not treated well. There's a lot of people that are killed during this time, and so she earns the nickname Bloody Mary because of the deaths that are happening for religious reasons during her reign. So she doesn't reign for forever. Eventually, her half-sister comes to the throne, okay, and Elizabeth I becomes the next queen. Okay. She is a symbol of stability and strength. She earns the nickname Good Queen Bess, and she is on the throne for a significant amount of time. Off the top of my head, I don't remember exactly how long she rules. But out of King Henry VIII's 3 kids, so we had Mary, we had Edward, who ruled for just a little bit. He was kind of a sickly guy. And Elizabeth definitely reigned the longest. Anyhow, I don't have that number in my head of how long she reigns, but she gets the nickname Good Queen Bess, and she tries to kind of find balance between the Protestants and the Catholics within her empire. One notable thing is she basically keeps her country safe. King Philip of Spain basically wants to kind of help take over England, and he has his fleet of ships, the Spanish Armada, that are coming to attack, and she sends out her navy and basically holds them off and keeps England from becoming a Spanish territory. If we had, or if England had become a Spanish territory, they probably would have changed the language, and a few things in the rest of world history would be different. So after that, we have a group known as the Puritans, okay, and they take this whole Protestant movement even further, and we'll see them pop up again in history. So jumping back over the channel into France, okay, France was a very dominant Catholic country, okay, but Protestant ideas are trying to trickle in here. And so we have a group known as the Huguenots. Okay, they were Protestant and they were definitely in the minority, so much smaller group within France. So let's talk a little bit about the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Okay, that is where roughly 20,000 Protestants were killed, and this comes down to kind of a weird family rivalry thing going on. We have the Valois family, the Guise family, and the Bourbon family. And it's a question of this next person in line to the throne, is he going to be Protestant or is he going to be Catholic? And things get a little crazy in France, because at one point he wants to be Catholic, and so basically they send out kind of this edict that allows this massacre to happen, I think right before the wedding, if I want to remember right. So on page 268 in your book, it says, one of the most shocking incidents occurred in 1572. Catherine de Medici, the mother of the French king and kind of the power behind the throne here, she instigated a massacre of the Huguenots in Paris. She planned this attack and lured many of the leaders under the guise of attending a marriage that would end the conflict. So on the morning of August 27th, bands of people began roving the city and breaking into homes and basically killing unsuspecting Protestants. So by the time all this ended, about 20,000 were dead, and we now have increased tension in France between the Catholics and the Protestants. And these differences had already led to wars and other things, but conflict breaks out again over who would be the next leader. So the Valois family had ruled France since about the 14th century, and their family was basically kind of dying out at this point. So 2 other families wanted the throne, the Guise family, okay, they were Roman Catholic, and went all the way back to Charlemagne. And the other family was the Bourbon family, and they were Huguenots and could trace their lineage back to Louis IX. So Henry of Navarre, he's the head of the Bourbon family and the leader of the Huguenots. Okay, he ends up with a throne, starts calling himself Henry IV, the King of France. But there's a problem, because a lot of the Frenchmen were still Roman Catholic, and they basically didn't want him as king. Right? And so to please the people and to have that throne, he became a Roman Catholic. And people thought that he had kind of deserted his Huguenot followers, but he granted them something called the Edict of Nantes, in 1598. and that allowed them certain religious liberties within the country. So kind of crazy, all these details going on in France. I probably spent more time on that than I wanted to, but that's okay. So let's wrap up with a counter-reformation. So basically, if I was to summarize this in one sentence, this is an attempt to stop the Reformation from spreading and increasing further. So couple groups that worked for this. One is the Jesuits, otherwise known as the Society of Jesus. Okay, a guy by the name of Ignatius Loyola basically promoted this counter-reformation. Okay, kind of became the big force behind all of this in about 1540. Okay, he really spent a lot of time studying and training, and basically kind of started this new order of priests within the church and started calling themselves the Jesuits. Okay. What else do I want to say about that? Their main big focus was on schools and education. That was a big part. There's still Jesuit schools around today. I can think of a couple right here in the Pacific Northwest. So definitely had a widespread influence. All right. So the Inquisition, we could talk about this like for like a couple weeks. But basically, it brought terror and death to European Protestants. They were guilty of whatever crime they were accused of until they could prove themselves innocent. Oftentimes, the accusations were false. Oftentimes, they were arrested at night and would have to stand before the inquisitor without really knowing what charges were brought against them. And they'd be asked to confess their wrong. And if methods of persuasion didn't produce a confession, the Inquisition also sometimes used torture. Many, whether or not they had confessed, were turned over to the authorities to be burned at the stake, and the family of the accused oftentimes would suffer as well through the arrest and the loss of property. Okay. There was also an index of prohibited books, okay, of what people were allowed to read and not to read. There were 48 alleged like false or heretical versions of the Bible that were prohibited. So definitely some regulations on reading, say, works from Luther or others that were part of the Reformation. So the Council of Trent, okay, they called this 25 years after the beginning of the Reformation. Pope Paul III called a church council basically to kind of discuss doctrinal questions and put forth some ideas for reform within the church. The outcome of all of this, they rejected the doctrine of faith alone. They basically sealed the break between the Protestants and the Catholics. And as they say, the rest is history. So that's where we're going to stop for this chapter. Let me stop sharing my slides. Thank you for watching. This video ended up being a little bit longer than I intended, but I appreciate you watching, and I hope you guys have a good day. Talk to you later.